Hi there, Dr. Andrea Schnowski from Freedom Chiropractic and Holistic Health in the Peoria Metro Center and our YouTube channel, Health and Horsepower. This is the last week of August. I cannot believe it, but we are going to be hitting September next week. So I wanted to come at you with our last back to school special. A lot of the kids have returned to school last week and this week. I think we're finally getting them all back in school. I know that we have some college students going back next week as well. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about chiropractic and a little bit more about like children's development and reaching milestones. I feel like I get a ton of questions about how chiropractic can help with children, but I also get a ton of questions about kids that are either not reaching milestones or have some developmental challenges and how we can look a little bit more into those to help them achieve those goals. So first thing I want to talk about, and I really want to encourage moms, especially with this, because I have had so many moms that bring their kids into the office and they doubt themselves a little bit, or they feel like they've been kind of gaslighted or questioned a lot. Like they had intuition, there's something wrong. I don't know exactly what it is, but I feel like there's something not quite right with my child, and they take them to their pediatrician and they get them checked out and everybody's like, oh, everything's fine. I don't know what you're talking about. They're just behind on things. That can be normal. But in reality, you know that there's something off with your child. You know that, you know what, I feel like there's something off. I feel like they're not quite reaching their milestones on time. I feel like they should have reached this by this point. And you know, and you trust your gut that there's something wrong, but you can't get anybody to listen. You can't get anybody to do the testing to find out what's going on. So I want to talk a little bit more. And number one, I want to encourage you to understand that you need to trust your gut. You need to trust your intuition when it comes to your kids. If you feel like something's off, if you know there's something wrong, and you're not getting the doctors and the specialists to do further testing or look into it further, you may want to look at a different style of assessment. I know in my office, typically I do a physical assessment. So I actually check joints, I check cranial bones, I check muscle development. A lot of times if they are moving, I also check to see their gait. So how they're walking, crawling. If they're not quite walking but are hanging onto things, I kind of like to see how their weight is positioned, because that can clue me into issues in the joints themselves that could be having some physical problems that's holding them back from reaching those milestones. Then to top it off, a lot of times I talk to you more about their dietary habits. I may talk a little bit more about their bowel movements, their digestion, so that really know what's going on for their overall health. Because when it comes down to it, when it comes to children's development, so number one, every single cell, muscle, and organ in our body is controlled by nerve function. So your brain and your spinal cord send out nerve signals to those organs and cells and muscles through nerves. If those nerves are not working properly, so whether we have nutritional issues going on, whether there is nerve pressure or muscle tension that's restricting and not allowing those nerves to fire and signal properly, or potentially if we have an issue where maybe there may be slow communication, there might be some tension that's not allowing the joints to move properly, that's not allowing those nerves to fire properly, we can definitely have issues with the nerves and the brain where they're not communicating or signaling properly or fast enough. Another thing too is babies and children's brains develop very rapidly in the first 2 years of life. If they have any of the bones of their cranial skull that are overlapping or potentially shifted differently from side to side, that can actually put pressure on the brain, and that can restrict how the cerebral spinal fluid, which is the fluid your brain floats in and that coats and protects your spinal cord, if that fluid is not flowing freely, we can actually have a buildup of inflammatory products that can actually restrict and cause issues with how the brain develops and fires on certain sides, which can affect certain milestones. So in some cases, I have found kiddos that are having issues specifically with like gait and walking and milestones physically, may have more issues on the top of their heads. Typically, speech areas are right above the ear and processing disorders are here, and eyesight and balance a lot of times is in the back of the head. So if we're having any issues with the cranial bones not moving properly and the brain's not firing properly or the nerves aren't signaling properly, those can be physical issues that we can help in our office. Another thing to think about is that babies' brains develop and are stimulated to make connections or synapses between neurons based upon their environment. So every single way that they use their senses. So when we look at things, when we touch things, when we taste things, when we are feeling different textures, when we are seeing different colors and contrasts, all of those things help our baby's brain to develop and make more connections. And the more connections they have, the faster they grow, the faster they learn, the faster they're able to make connections and actually kind of move upon that. So really important to make sure that in addition to trusting your intuition and making sure physically their bodies are working well, we also want to make sure that they are getting a lot of input from their environment. Kids that are not getting love, that are not getting touch, that are not getting stimulation and being able to see things and test things and play aren't really going to develop on the same level as kids that have those opportunities. So you don't necessarily need to take them to museums or anything like that. You can interact with them at home. You can take them outside for a walk. There's many things you can do yourself as a parent to help stimulate brain development and neuron synapse formation as well. So very important to make sure that you are doing those things, letting them interact, letting them explore their environment and get in a little trouble. Obviously, we want to be careful what they're putting in their mouth, but very important to make sure that they're getting that stimulation. Now, when it comes to chiropractic, like I mentioned, I typically do a physical assessment. So I check cranial bones, I check neck, I check muscles of the whole entire body, I check how they're walking to assess to see if there's any issues. Now, typically when it comes to kids, let's face it, as they are reaching some of those milestones, learning how to roll over, learning how to crawl, pulling up on things or falling down on things, as they learn how to walk and fall down, as they're roughhousing with, brothers and sisters or playing sports and things like that, they're going to injure themselves. So it's very important to realize that we do need regular chiropractic checks for kids. I typically recommend that their first check be done in the first 2 weeks of life. So whether you are calling me on the way home from the hospital, say, hey, can you check mom and baby out, make sure everybody's doing okay after the birth, or whether you're scheduling that within the first 2 weeks, we want to make sure that everything feels great and is working great so that you guys both get the best start in life, and make sure that everybody is sleeping and as healthy as possible during those first 2 weeks. After that, I typically recommend checking in about once a month if there's no health issues going on. If there are some health issues going on, sometimes I do recommend more frequent treatment. So for example, say I have a kiddo that's having some trouble with nursing and we've got some jaw or shoulder issues or neck issues going on, I may see them more frequently, like maybe once or twice a week for about a month or so, just until we're able to get that moving and stable, and then we can kind of go back to more maintenance care at that point. But typically, like I said, the first 2 weeks of life, and then monthly after that, when they're going through milestones, so learning how to walk, learning how to crawl, they're falling often, I do recommend making sure potentially that they come in more frequently during that time. Usually once they're through all the milestones, like in the first 2 years of life, then I recommend checking in about once every other month. Again, just making sure things are moving well. I have some patients that we check in every 2 months. They're doing great. There's no adjustment. I don't charge if we don't do a treatment. And they're able to stay well and they're able to stay stable so that when they're doing sports, they know, hey, I got to be going in. I got to be checked out. I got to make sure that everything's working properly. And that's how I do things in my office. So if you have any questions, feel free to post that in the comments below. You can also schedule an appointment at my office. You can go on our website, freedompeoria.org, or give our office a call, 309-689-6200. We'll see you again next week.